So let's start with these so-called men. The first formula Lacan presents in chapter 8 is masculine and probably fairly familiar to you, especially if you've read ahead into some of his other seminars. It looks something like this. You've got the upside down big A next to an X, and then you've got the signifier for the symbolic phallus, or just the phallus. This is the signifier for castration next to another X. And the X is going to be men or women, but here we're dealing with men. And here's how we read this particular formula, the first formula that we see popping in chapter 8. This first instance of pure writing relative to masculine subject positions. For all men, don't forget the capital A upside down is the letter Lacan is inverting to create a written representation, if you will, a writing of the universal. So anytime you see this big A upside down, it means for all X's. Here we're talking about men, so X is men. For all men, here's the universal, for all men, the phallic function, represented by the capital I with a circle through it, is valid. And that little X here says it's valid for these men. For all men, the phallic function is valid. Now, what does this mean? This bit of pure writing, what does it tell us? What's the discourse that we can speak atop it? It says that all masculine subjectivities are castrated. To be a masculinized subject in today's world is to be castrated, Lacan is claiming. All so-called men endure castration. But this, in turn, implies another formula, one that's not presented in chapter 8, but I think is still worth us trotting out here. It looks something like this. And now we get another weird usage of a letter. Here you don't see an A upside down, but an E that has been flipped backwards. A capital E flipped backwards next to an X. And then you've got the signifier for the phallic experience of castration next to another X. And above the phallic function here, is what this means, you see a line, a horizontal bar. This means negation. It negates whatever is underneath it. Lacan is careful but also kind of unclearly trying to point this out in chapter 8. The horizontal bar in question here in chapter 8 is not that which divides signifiers from signifieds. It's that which negates whatever comes underneath it. So the capital E that's been flipped backwards means some. Upside down big A means all. Capital E flipped backwards means some. And here's how we read this second formula for masculinity. In order for the first formula to account for and do its work of universalizing all men, the first thing you want to notice here is that this second formula is occasioned by the work that the first formula is doing when it tries to universalize all men. And once we start there, then you can see precisely what this second formula means. So in order for the first formula, this one with an upside down A, X next to the I with a circle through it, and the X that says, for all men, the phallic function is valid. In other words, all masculine subjectivities are castrated. In order for this universal claim that all men are castrated to work, in order for this total, complete set of all men to operate, in order for this first formula to account for that operation, for all men, thereby resulting in a total, complete set comprised of each and every man. You see, it's a universal. There has to be one man in particular who is excluded from this set of all men and truly peculiar as a result. And you know how this logic works. We've talked about this logic before. If everything for the camping trip is packed, you got to stop the car and turn around because nothing has been left out. Nothing has been left behind. Nothing has been excluded from the complete and whole packing job that you did for this camping trip. This is the logic that Lacan is working with here once again in these two formulas. In order for all men to endure and be defined by castrative logics, there have to be some men, some one man in particular, who eludes this logic. The only way to guarantee a complete whole set of everything is to make sure that nothing is excluded. Nothing has to be left out in order for the set of everything to hang together. That's how Lacan is thinking this through. That's how he's arriving at his formulas of masculinity. I'll show you the passages here in a second. The second formula accounts for this logical necessity. And here's how it reads. There is always at least one man, that's the backwards EX, some man, one man, there's always somebody, some man, who is not submitted to the phallic function. That's what the negation above the phallic signifier here means. It means that there's always somebody who eludes castrative logic. There's always someone who is not like all men ruled by the phallic function, someone who is not submitted to its rule. In other words, someone who is not castrated. So the first formula reads, all men are castrated. The second formula reminds you that in order for the category of all men to hold, there has to be someone who is not castrated, not included in that category, someone whose position relative to that categorization is nothing. And Lacan is now searching for, with the second formula, who this motherfucker is. Who is this one person who is not, hence the line above phallic signifier, who is not castrated. If all men are truly castrated, then there must be one person excluded from that count, nothing relative to that count, who is not. Who or what, my dear friends, is this exceptional man? Why, it's the mythic father of the primal horde, of course. This mythically unconstrained, fantastically uncastrated man who supposedly enjoys exclusive access to, quote, all the women. And if you want some passages for this, passages that I think are just fabulous, because it shows Lacan trying his best to explain this logic to his audience. You can start on page 151 of the PDF and then go to 152. It's page 17 of the chapter, if you're looking at the chapter pages, or 18 of the chapter. It's about midway down, just above another formula that we'll talk about in a minute. Here's what he says about man, about men. Man is a phallic function, insofar as he is every man. But as you know, there are the greatest doubts to be had about the fact that, quote, every man, or italicized, every man exists. This is what is at stake. It is that he can only be so under the heading of every man, namely a signifier, nothing more. You don't need the signifier part for this in order to understand how Lacan is thinking it through. He's saying in order to be a man, you have to be included in this category known as all men. But he's saying here that there's something about that categorization that makes its existence questionable. All men is never going to walk up your driveway and knock on your door. So how on earth is it supposed to be guaranteed? What is the guarantee that allows this totalizing set known as every man to hold water, or in this case, men, to hang together? In this case, I'm not even going to push that metaphor any further about hanging and the like. Next page is the one where Lacan tries to hit it again and explain what needs to be done in order to make the totalizing set known as all men hold together. Nothing can be grounded about the status of man, he says on the next page. I mean seen from analytic experience, except by constructing artificially, mythically, this everyman with this presumed one. The presumed one, he says, by God, it's the mythical father of totem and taboo, namely the one who is capable of satisfying the enjoyment of all the women. It's right here on page 18 in the chapter, 152. You can read it for yourself. Once more, I want to illustrate I am not just making this shit up. In order for all men to suffer and be defined by castrative logics, as the first formula states, in order for this universal claim about men to operate and to function, there has to be one person who is kicked out of the totalizing set. In order for everything to be included, every man to be included, one man who is nothing relative to this collection of everything has to be left out, has to be excluded. Now you can see why it's been so important for us to keep working this container thing contained, everything relative to nothing logic from Seminar 14 forward. It's precisely here that Lacan is building his understanding of masculine subjectivity atop this basic line of thought around total sets that contain everything and the exclusion of nothing that has to occur in order for that set of everything to remain valid.